we'd like to go ahead and start our Inntopia DestiMetrics 5 things you need to know for November 2021. So I'm going to kick us off with number 1. So this is just a highlight of the headlines that we're seeing across the country when it comes to ski. So I plucked a few of them out, and you can see here there's some chatter about what might be expected on the slopes this winter. And so these are mostly consumer messages. You know, we've got many publications that are talking to our consumers about what they can expect when they plan to go skiing this year. So I'll talk about that and see how that might line up with what you're planning. Lots of talk about shortages, unfortunately, when it comes to workers, housing, and gear in our mountain towns. Also, we're open for business, meaning that there are several ski resorts that are open, many that opened as early as October. So we'll just celebrate that a little bit and talk about what we've got look forward to as far as other early openings. And then with the opening of our borders and allowing international guests to flow freely into the country, well, to some extent, with vaccines and masks and so forth, that brings J1 visas. And I'll just highlight that a little bit and what that looks like, some of the upside and some of the challenges that we have going on there. But I'm sure a lot of this is not new news to you, but it's definitely what's being talked about, and definitely some challenges. But also we're heading into what looks like it may be a really great winter, especially with a lot of demand and a lot of early bookings, which Tom is going to touch on as well. So over to you, Tom, for number 2.
Thank you, Katie. Welcome, everybody. Number 2 in our top 5, and again, they're not in any particular order, is that inflation, which last month we said might be a thing, is actually officially a thing now. Consumer prices are up 6.2% in October compared to October of last year, and that is the highest level it's been at any time since early 1990, led by energy, which overall is up about 30%. And the question is, so what? Well, inflation is now outpacing earnings growth, and that starts to impact consumers. We'll take a deep dive on that later on. But heating fuel is up 59%, gasoline's up 50%, meats are up 15 to 20%, and those things hit consumers really where it hurts the most. And if you're a family of 3 or 5, things are getting a lot more expensive right now. So that's an issue that sits in the background amidst all the good news that we're going to be talking about a little bit later. One of the good news pieces is that travel restrictions have been eased, and that's great. Katie touched on this. 20 months after strict travel restrictions are put in place, non-essential travel to the U.S. is now open from many countries, including those countries that are most focused that we bring in ski from, like Canada and over in the UK. Airlines are ramping up service options. This chart on here has been provided by Bill Tomsich over at Air Planners, and what we're looking at really is the increase in international flights from Canada by each of those carriers over time, looking at where international flights were at April earlier this year and where they're going to be by March 2022. In fact, this isn't flights, this is seats, which is even that much more important. And you can see that particularly Air Canada and WestJet are banking pretty big on air travel returning January, February, March. So major US Canadian carriers are scheduling a lot more seats. The impediment to travel being removed is really big. The question is, are travelers actually going to show up and come? I think there are a couple of roadblocks there that we need to overcome. We'll talk about that a little bit later too. Room nights available, declines are stabilizing. We talked about this a lot over the course of the past, 10 months or so, that room nights available were down from 2 years ago. And that's starting to settle down now. Declines in available units for rental, which have been steady declines since March of last year, are really slowing down. So, those declines can drive up room rates. They can push consumers to less regulated options. They do create anomalies in occupancy and revenue data when you're comparing year over year or year over 2 years. But more broadly, one of the things is that the instability that drove changes in how the homeowners were behaving around those units that they might have in the professional inventory is changing, either with the real estate market slowing down or second homeowners are settled in now, might even be putting units back on. So the fact that things are stabilizing or normalizing is good news for sure. And lastly is, as we've been doing now during these top 5 things, taking a look at the DestiMetrics performance. On the left-hand side, looking how summer wound up versus 20 on the left-hand side and versus 2019 on the bottom of the left-hand side, with occupancy versus last year up 45%, ADR up 24%, RevPAR up 81%. We've said all along, this shouldn't be a surprise, that sort of recovery from the bottom metrics. But looking back versus 2 years ago in 2019, which was the prior record summer, up 1% in occupancy, 33% on ADR, and 34% on revenue. And looking at winter on the books, which is where we really now are turning our focus, got really strong numbers, both versus last year at this same time, looking forward at November through April arrivals, with occupancy up 75% from where it was at this time last year, 24% on ADR, 116% on revenue. And of course, the context is we weren't really sure what was going on, and there were no vaccines back as of October 31st last year. But versus 1920, up 19% in occupancy, 21% in ADR, 43% in revenue. And that is a very strong winter season that we were looking forward at as of October 31st in 2019. So comparing versus that and seeing those big green numbers is really, really good. So that's the last of the top 5, but there are things to talk about that are in there as well. And I'd like to welcome Rich. I'm going to hand it over to Katie and Rich to spur a little conversation, hear what Rich has to offer. And welcome, friend.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome, Rich. We would love to hear what's going on at Snowbird. I mean, unless if you want to, chime in on inflation and some of the other things that Tom talked about, but I think that you have some things to share with us regarding what's going on at Snowbird, some opportunities, challenges, when are you open for business?
Sure. So we're kind of set over the last couple of years, being conservative, so we're not going to open till December 1st. We had some great early snow this last week. I think we had over a foot in the upper half of the mountain. Earlier snows, we had up to 30 inches up top. So lots of uphill traffic, folks trying to get those early turns in for sure. A lot of early openers in the state. Our neighbor Solitude is looking as early as November 19th. They might have to adjust that a little bit. I know that Park City's also looking at that weekend, but anything they have will have to be in the upper halves of the mountain. But most of the folks are still trying to get out a little early on their dates, I think, just based on what we have for snow down low. Kind of touching back on the trends that we saw in the last part of the top 5 there, we're seeing very similar trends here at the resort. We're definitely seeing longer booking windows returning, especially with international guests. We're seeing less of the wait and see what happens crowd that we had last winter, to folks that are really trying to make sure they've got their holiday weeks booked. Larger units are all pretty much booked up. A lot of our owners have stayed either using their units. We haven't had too many leave the rental pool. I think less than 5 out of our property, which is excellent over the 5 properties. So still kind of keeping those numbers a little consistent last year to this year. Summer, I'll kind of do the staffing shortage story like everybody else. We have a hotel of ours that typically in the summertime maybe has a housekeeping staff of 70 that had a housekeeping staff of 12 this year. So there was a lot of banking of rooms and compressing availability to the weekends. And of course, a lot of support from, I'll say, director of lodging on down that we were all stripping rooms and trying to make the turnaround time shorter for our housekeeping staff and trying not to burn them out. As you guys mentioned, with the borders opening, hopefully we'll see some more late J1s. But for us to really kind of set our winter look for H2Bs, we actually cold called other resorts in Maine, in Michigan, and looked for H2Bs that were in country already looking to extend. So I think we were able to find about 19 or so folks who were doing that over a weekend. Again, that was an all hands on deck, driven by our director of lodging, Levi Thorne. So that was a good success for us, and we feel it kind of helped us set up a little good for winter.
That's brilliant. Rich, do you feel like you're in a pretty good place for staffing for this coming winter?
We would always like more staff, right? Make it easier on everybody else. I think that, we still have, because we also own, a majority of the operations at the resort, especially food and beverage, we need to staff that as well. So I think we're still looking for staff. I think we're putting ourselves in a good space to start with being able to flip the hotel and offer clean rooms based on what we've got on the books already between our group and owners as well as our transient bookings. Looking ahead at winter right now, I think we're up about 26% ahead of 2019 of just transient reservations on the books right now. So we're feeling good about that as well, and that we're not having to play the games we had to this summer.
Sure. And do you worry? I believe you guys are running the mountain at full capacity and unrestricted. Do you worry that might be a bit of an overload when those folks come to stay at the resort?
So I think we have two situations. One, I know, we're going to do away with our ghost lanes this year. And last year it looked like we had long lift lines, but really they were shorter than they will be. There is probably still going to be a restriction on our tram, which typically holds about 120 people per run. Those will probably still be required to wear a mask on that unit because it's the enclosed box.
Yeah.
And we probably last year we ran at 50 people. We'll probably run up that to like 80 people per load this year. Maybe that's not set in stone yet. I know we're still looking at that. I think with last year we didn't have paid parking, but we did require reservations for parking. This year our neighbor next door, Alta, is doing paid parking. So we're more concerned that our parking lots are going to fill up before we actually get our skiers in, that the Alta folks will start to utilize our parking lot. So we're looking at ways to mitigate that right now. The mountain, capacity is tons of terrain, so it's never really been a capacity issue for us. So I think we'll be fine both with the return of our day skiers as well as our lodging guests.
Well, good. Sounds like you're not anticipating any major problems unless, of course, everybody chooses to drive to Alta very early.
Right. I think it's just, where we're looking at on that routine. I know that unfortunately the Wall Street Journal got to break the story and we didn't get to have the narrative on it. Being a powder resort, we are introducing kind of our fast tracks program this year. Early signs on it. The first few days we had some pretty good traffic in there, and then it's kind of been quiet as far as people purchasing in advance. The guests that we are seeing buying are either targeting holiday periods where lines tend to be long anyways. And we are seeing both pass holders and day ticket holders buy that Fast Tracks program on select days.
Sure. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. And you're probably not the first person to be scooped by the Wall Street Journal.
Right.